Okay, here's your short introduction to Chapter 2, and here are some of the learning objectives that um, are there for this chapter. In other words, each of you should be able to do these particular activities or define these theories or ideas or concepts. And so, of course, the first one we're going to talk about is evolution and its approach to human development. Um, So we have evolution in itself as natural selection, adaptation, the ability to adapt and survive through natural selection, fitness, and inclusive fitness. Of course, evolutionary psychology deals with, okay, how do we apply evolution to our human growth, especially cognitively and otherwise? How do we achieve a goal, such as mating? Well, we do need to pass on that gene pool if we're going to survive. So how much energy is that going to take? How much am I going to have to give up to get that mate? What now if if it doesn't work out? Are there rivals? How do I keep my chosen one from those rivals? Okay, then we have to conceive to pass on our gene pool. And we need those social connections to survive. We know that we survive better in a group than we do as individuals. So we need to protect our gene pool. And we can see how this evolved. And then we need to feel happy and content once we have protected that gene pool. So we see where our facial expressions have come from that relate to other people. So, of course, the link to psychosocial approach is culture and family provide the context that help individuals to grow and adapt and thus survive. Um, and then, of course, Freud's explanation, which the psychic structures of the id, the ego, and the superego, the id operating on the pleasure principle, basically sex and aggression, the superego, trying to keep that in check with the moral reasoning that we gain through our society, our family, and then, of course, the reality principle is through our ego, kind of the balancing between the id and the superego. And of course, a lot of this relates back to our parents. And how many of you still hear your parents' voice in your head when you perform certain activities or behaviors? He said there's three levels of consciousness. There's what you are aware of right now. There's things that are easily brought to your awareness. In other words, what did you have for lunch yesterday? And then there's those hidden thoughts or ideas, which often Freud felt were very unpleasant and needed to be brought up through special interventions. And then, of course, psychosexual developmental stages are key in the Freudian approach. So your oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. Basically, you're gaining satisfaction through various parts of the body. And this little chart shows you what are the conflicts and experiences and what are the outcomes. If you have a fixation, that means you're stuck in the oral stage, so you're still smoking or eating or things that just associate with your mouth. Are you anal retentive, anal explosive, those types of behaviors. And they all lead to what he felt would be healthy interactions with the opposite gender, which then would lead to um, survival, and especially passing on of that gene pool, which he was a definite believer in Darwin's theory. So here we see the links to the psychosocial approach. Is Freud, the stages are, I put here finished by adolescence, but oftentimes many would say by the time you're about 6 years old, whereas psychosocial, it's lifelong. Basic needs are being met towards sex and aggression, but with the psychosocial, it's more social demands that are needed to be met. And again, development kind of ends at adolescence and then kind of plays out through sublimation and fixation. Sublimation is just a redirection of the id, basically, whereas in psychosocial, social contexts change over a whole lifetime, thus introducing new resources and social support. So it kind of goes from the individual to group once again. Cognitive development is basically the growth and change of a person's ability to process information, solve problems, gain knowledge. Of course, Piaget is going to be someone we're going to look at quite a bit, and his 4 stages of cognitive development we'll talk about as we go through the class. He talks that we have information organized in our brain in schemas or categories, and we take information in through this through assimilation and accommodation. So we have equilibrium when we're feeling okay about something. And then all of a sudden it's thrown into disequilibrium. In other words, you have a schema that is for college classes, but maybe you've never taken an online class, so you're thrown into disequilibrium. What do I do? How do I handle this? What buttons do I push? How do I get into the publisher side as opposed to Blackboard? What happens if something goes down? And so now, once you kind of settle all of that and you feel comfortable with it, then you've come into a new equilibrium. In other words, you've accommodated, you've modified your category, your schema that relates to college classes. Vygotsky is someone that fits very well with what we're going to cover, and I feel that he has a lot to say. And so he talks about what do you know without any interaction with other people. And then you go through what's called the zone of proximal development. In other words, how far can I go through the interaction with either an adult or a peer? He calls them a more knowledgeable other, an MKO. In other words, a more knowledgeable other is somebody that knows more about the topic than I do. And so the zone of proximal development is how much can I develop and change and grow through interaction with another person. So it's very as a social constructivist type of approach. So it's culture was very big with Vygotsky, because this is how we transmit culture. It's a cooperative dialogue. We're working with someone else. We're going to talk about private speech here in just a second. So here again is the zone of proximal development. Scaffolding is a term that Vygotsky didn't use, but was put in later because it fit with him. In other words, how do we build in that learning process? It's just like when I need to change a light bulb that's way above my ability to reach, I build some scaffolding. Painters use scaffolding all the time so that they can paint the ceiling. So how are we going to get to that from what I know as an individual to what I will know with an interaction with another person? That would be through scaffolding. So first maybe I model the behavior, then we do it together, then you do it on your own, and then you show someone else. That would be scaffolding. So you look at this private speech is very important because he felt that children are constantly talking to themselves. Matter of fact, you probably talk to yourself. We call it self-talk in adults. But he felt that they were organizing their thoughts and ideas through that. They were solving problems. So if you've been around little children and you watch them, oftentimes they're talking away to themselves as they're talking about maybe the characters that they're dealing with or the situation, the interaction between the various characters. So a lot of this happens during play, which Vygotsky thought was very, very important, and we'll talk about in a later chapter. And so again, at the very bottom, socioculture, social and culture are the two components that he feels are very important. So our cognitive development comes through interaction with other people. And here's just a few differences between Piaget and Vygotsky. Piaget believes it's genetic, Vygotsky social. Piaget called them little scientists. Vygotsky said they're little apprentices in learning. The child develops determines the development. Social interaction determines the development. And then the teacher plays a limited role, Piaget, but plays a huge role with Vygotsky. So Piaget stages, he talks about stages, which is very much the psychosocial approach, but stops at formal operations in adolescence, which again, the psychosocial approach goes into all the way to death. cognitive development the person is evaluated as the same as objects. Psychosocial theory refers to the ego development that shapes a personal identity with values, goals, and beliefs. Vygotsky is very, very close to the psychosocial approach in just about every single way that we could compare the two. And then the learning approach, which I feel is very, very important. I think all of us are a product of our interactions with others. And of course, Skinner, Pavlov, and Bandura are three people we're going to talk about. So Pavlov, of course, with his dogs, and he talks about an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, and then a bell or a neutral stimulus, and then we pair those two together, and pretty soon the bell causes the conditioned stimulus. The bell becomes a conditioned stimulus, and the conditioned response stays the same. The dog now salivates at the sound of a bell as well as the taste of food. So think of a child. A child hears footsteps coming down the hallway. What do those footsteps mean? At first they don't mean anything, but then do they mean that oh no, here comes something bad because people treat me poorly, or yay, here comes somebody that's going to make me feel good about myself. So just something like that. There's a physiological response that is created. And so here's this kind of a little joke that maybe it's going both ways. And this is going to be important in our approach to development, is it does go both ways. It's not just, so not in this case, but if we're talking about a parent-child interaction, both are playing a key role in what's going on in that environment. The child is playing a role, is an active agent. The parent is an active agent. Of course, John Watson conditioned fear into little Albert. He's the one that wanted to have a baby farm. He said things like, when you're tempted to pet your child, remember that mother love is a dangerous instrument. Mothering undermines good character. Mothering leads to weakness, fear, inferiority, whiny, irresponsible, dependent failures. Serious rocks are ahead for the overkissed child. A person we're going to talk about later in another lecture, Harry Harlow, says no one treated emotion more coldly. Actually, John Watson wanted to have a baby farm at one time. He said, give me any child that's cognitively and physically normal, healthy. I can make of them whatever I want based on manipulation of the environment. So again, using classical and operant conditioning. And then operant conditioning, of course, B.F. Skinner is saying that in a this is a very simple way. I act on my environment gives me some feedback, and then that's going to determine my future behavior. We have reinforcements which lead to the likelihood that a behavior will repeat itself. We have punishment that leads to the likelihood that a behavior will not repeat itself. So this child got a gold star. Hopefully they will say, oh, I want to do better because I get more gold stars. You know what? In order to avoid punishment, in order to avoid my parents getting on me, I'm going to clean my room. I'm going to get involved in this particular behavior. We can have punishment by application. We yell or scream, or removal. We take something away. We'll talk about timeout later on. So that's Skinner. And then, of course, social. If you haven't seen the Bobo doll experiment, then here's Albert Bandura, and he says that we learn vicariously, that we are social animals, and we learn through observing others, that they are our role models, and then we imitate their behaviors. He talked about reciprocal causation, that it's three things. It's the person, the environment, and the behavior that ultimately play out as to how we behave in a particular situation. I like self-efficacy because I think it's more important than self-esteem. How well do I think that I can do, or what a chance do I have of succeeding in a particular situation? This will really motivate and drive us and lead us in certain directions. So you're taking this class, I would imagine, because you have a level of self-efficacy that is leading you to believe that you can do well in this class. Of course, this is really closely linked to psychosocial behavior because, once again, it's our interaction with other people. Culture obviously plays a huge role in our development. So in this approach, we're going to talk about individualist cultures, which tend to be more Western Occidental, and collectivist cultures, which tend to be more traditional. So it's kind of me versus we, and here's a couple of comparisons between the two types of culture. And so culture provides the context in which development occurs. Um, Culture transmits the values. The link is so close that it's hard to separate the two out from one another. And then the last is Yuri Bronfenbrenner, and I'm not going to say much here because there's a short mini lecture that goes with the assignment related to Bronfenbrenner's idea. But interrelationships in the systems, what Bronfenbrenner felt was that too much of developmental research had been done between two people. And oftentimes those two people didn't know each other, and oftentimes they were in an unfamiliar setting. So he wanted to study people within the context of the multi-layered approach. So it's kind of like each layer, each system is embedded within the other. So we see here, we see the microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, and the macrosystem, and out to the chronosystem. So each one of these is embedded, but each is having an effect on the development of you, of me, of a child, of an adult. And again, please watch the instructional video that goes with the assignment, because I will go into more depth. So that's the end of chapter 2.